I know we weren't there to fight, but when it's put up to you, you don't walk away. Jadotville and the Congo in general, the Irish Defence Forces and the Irish government learned to grow up, to come into reality.
Ireland, 1961, a time of unemployment and emigration. For young men, the Irish Army offered opportunity and adventure. This is the story of how 3 Irishmen's lives and reputations were put at risk while peacekeeping in Central Africa.
Ours was a mandate for peacekeeping and nothing else.
I never heard one word about anybody not being able to pull the trigger or defend themselves.
It should never, ever, ever have happened. And I hope it never happens again.
Contingents of United Nations troops continue to pour into the Congo, a newly independent, strife-torn storm center of global tension and controversy.
The 60s was a decade of strife for colonized Africa. The former Belgian colony of the Congo proved a major flashpoint. In 1961, the Congo was drifting towards civil war. In the south, white Belgian colonial mercenaries and local troops fought to retain control of the province of Katanga. At stake was vast mining territory. Irish UN troops were called in to Katanga to keep the peace. In 1960, 9 Irish UN soldiers were brutally attacked and killed at Niemba. 1 year later, the siege of the mining town of Jadotville would put Irish lives and reputations at risk once more.
You are my theme for a dream, yes you are, a rare and lovely theme. You're a theme for a dream.
For Bill Reedy, life was quiet in the small village of Kildang in County Kildare. He joined the army at 16 years of age.
Never even had thought of the army until my mother, God rest her, saw an application or saw an advertisement in the paper for an apprentice. Without me even knowing it, she sent the applications away, and so I went for the army and a mechanic in the apprentice school in Naas. I was never much into weaponry now. I didn't like guns and still don't like guns, but I could see that going into be a mechanic didn't involve guns, so I was delighted.
For Tig Quinn from County Limerick, the army was the only option after leaving school.
There was no jobs, there was no money, and I suppose at the end of the day I had a choice of, you know, join the army or take the boat to England or somewhere else. That I wasn't interested in, really. I had a fascination with guns. I really still have, actually. I felt really comfortable with guns. I don't know why, but I just did, like, you know, because there wasn't any military history in any of my family on either side.
For Tipperary-born Sean Foley, soldiering was a dream.
The reason I joined the forces, my father, he'd been part of the LDF during the emergency years of 1939 to 1946. I remember putting on the Glengarry, and there was a neighbour came in and he said, "You'll never see the day you'll wear it." And I felt that was an incentive to serve with colours at some stage.
In June 1961, the Irishmen of A Company left Ireland for the Congo as part of the Irish 35th Battalion.
We were all given a plastic bag with an apple and an orange and a banana and 2 sandwiches in it for the trip, 13 hours. So we were well looked after in that respect.
And after that 13-hour flight, the Irish soldiers finally touched down in Africa.
The minute we stepped off the plane, you just felt like you were going to melt. It was so much humidity.
We're dressed in old wool. Now, that's the old army uniform that people be looking at in 1916 and 21 and 22.
But bull's wool changed to tropical uniforms, and the Irish were soon mixing with the Congolese locals.
If you are my friend, you see, if you are my friend,
you would give it to me a lot cheaper.
Yes, I give a production 50. Because you my friend. All right?
You're a bit too Irish.
The UN employed a lot of local people in the kitchens and in the cookhouses and places like that, you know. So we got used to the locals very quick, and we're very jolly, happy people, even though we couldn't speak the same language.
We didn't get on that particularly well with the white population. You know, they accepted us in the story.
The Irish troops were sent on active duty rounding up mercenaries. Mainly white Belgian settlers and native Katangese with a large stake in Katanga's wealth. They resented the Irish UN troops.
A follow-up or a response to our action was more or less expected from the Katangese.
The situation in Katanga was volatile. Lives were at risk. The Belgian government requested a UN presence to protect white Belgian settlers in the town of Jadotville. A wealthy mining community, Jadotville had previously been controlled by Belgian mercenaries and Katangese troops.
We knew there was two companies in Jadotville at the time. One of them was a Swedish company and the other was B Company, which would have been from the Southern Command. And like they say, the Swedes, they went, they saw, and they came home. Because it was very obvious. They just didn't want any United Nations troops there.
There was this thing in the back of your mind, even though I was only a junior NCO, if they had come out of Jadotville, they must have had a very good reason to come out of it.
Despite continuing hostilities, the Irish soldiers of A Company were ordered into Jadotville. They had only limited transport and were forced to leave essential ammunition and supplies behind.
Common Quinlan and our Swedish interpreter, Lawrence Freeburg, went into Jadotville on a recce, and they were actually told that UN weren't required and to go back to where we came from. Common Quinlan, as far as I know, relayed this information back to headquarters, but he was told to stay put.
The atmosphere in Jadotville continued to deteriorate. The UN were seen by some factions to be propping up the other side. The white settlers saw the UN as a threat to their governance and their wealth.
As soon as we went to Jadotville, the first job for us was to dig trenches for defence of ourselves and defence of our positions. And only we did that, we wouldn't be here to tell the story.
The mercenary-led troops and their jeeps, they used to drive up and down and they'd swing the machine guns on their axis in towards where they could see people.
On the morning of September 13th, 1961, Jadotville was quiet.
I saw 2 or 3 jeeps coming down from the Jadotville side, and it was just then that the shots rang out from the machine gun. Everybody looked at one another. There was a mad scramble. Everybody knew where they had to be. So we went into the trenches we had already dug and waited for the onslaught that we expected was surely going to come.
It was just this eerie quietness. And you didn't know how to take it, like, you know. We were in no man's land and we were going to get out there very handy.
Dug in on the outskirts of Jadotville, the Irish were suddenly surrounded by 3,000 Katangese led by Belgian mercenaries.
About 11 o'clock then, all hell broke loose.
There was rounds impacting off the building behind it. There was rounds impacting off the front of the trenches.
It was our first time ever coming in fire, like, you know, we were in the range up in Ardmore and at Lone or down the court or whatever. But there was nobody there to fire back at you, like, you know, which was a big difference. For some reason or other, they thought they had to get up very near us to murder us, you know. And when they did that, we were able to take them out. I hope they were going to die when they fired the murders, because if they didn't, they were going to keep coming. And if they kept coming, like, you know, that was it for us.
I felt this calmness coming over me. You know, I said, this is what I'm all about from when I could run after a ball. I said, my modus operandi was to get myself into the army, to get overseas. I said, Africa was the place to be. I said, here I am now. The ball is in my court. There's all those people out there, and their intention is to kill me and kill my comrades. And my job as a section commander was to get the full value of the weapons and ammunition we had, and as far as possible to keep them a distance as long as we could.
You couldn't show fear because nobody else showed it. Ginny Mac, you couldn't do that, you know. But it was okay.
In this hostile environment, young Irishmen faced the very real and terrifying prospect of death.
As a young person of 21, even in people that get killed in Iraq, they never think that it's going to be me.
For Bill Reedy, the situation quickly deteriorated.
I was lying down when I was shot the first time. It was a sniper from right back from behind me, nearly behind me, caught me in the thigh and went through my thigh and through my stomach and out. And when I was shot, I jumped up, and when I jumped up I was hit from the front again. And I was very lucky that I was wearing basic pouches, which are pouches that carry extra magazines with the extra rounds in them. And I had 2 magazines in that particular pouch, and I had 2 hand grenades on top of the magazines. So an inch to the right or an inch higher and I was gone into pieces.
The Irishmen came under blistering enemy attack from both land and air.
The jet arrived in. Now, we knew they were very well equipped, like, but we knew that we could cope with them at that stage. But we hadn't bargained for the jet. And this will cost havoc, like, you know.
For the besieged Irish troops, one day blurred into the next. With searing heat and little food, conditions in the trenches were grim.
Some of the boys on the front lines, they were out in the open, you know, from sunrise to sunset. And they took a terrible problem with it.
We were under fire night and day. So it was a long, long time in tropical heat, having heavy uniform, heavy equipment. It's just unbearable. In tropical heat, water doesn't hold for long, so it only lasts a very short time. So we ended up then, for water-wise, you just wet your lips.
They started giving out cans of pineapple juice, 1 to every trench then, and that's where the penknife came into it. You know, you stab a hole each side of it. The whole idea was to keep the flies away from it, you know. You don't know where they had been before that. They could have been on dead bodies across the stream or whatever.
Throughout the battle, the Irish Company's Commandant Pat Quinlan desperately sought backup for his men from UN headquarters. His efforts were continually frustrated.
Now, there was 2 columns sent out from Elizabethville to try and relieve us, but unfortunately the columns couldn't get through. So we were left high and dry.
They were going to send out ammunition and food and water. Now, the helicopter they had was clapped out long past its sell-by date. And there was 2 very, very brave men to fly this thing from Elizabethville up to Jadotville with a few jerry cans of water, which was tainted with oil, non-drinkable. So, you know, comedy of errors.
Low on ammunition and food, the Irish troops battled fiercely on. Despite being outnumbered by thousands of Katangese, the Irishmen inflicted large casualties and did not suffer a single fatality. After 5 days and 5 nights, a ceasefire became a real possibility.
We're all over trenches. We were told there was a ceasefire, and next thing we're just taken prisoner. surrender. It was a ceasefire that day broke.
The situation changed for the worse. Instead of negotiations, the Irishmen were surrounded by thousands of Katangese and taken hostage.
We made sure that any of the weapons we had, that they weren't going to be serviceable for the Katangese to use them against us.
The first night, I think, was the worst night because, you know, the night before we had our weapons, we had ammunition, and we didn't have food and water, but at least you had security. That night was bad.
The locals used to come around, and they weren't very happy that we were there at all, because initially they thought they could come in and just wipe us out. They didn't want us kept prisoner, they wanted us finished. It was a known fact that the UN also had prisoners, that we would be safe as long as they were safe. That's the way I thought, and I suppose that's what kept me going and kept the other lads going as well, you know, because we used to chat about it and say, oh sure, look, we'll be out tomorrow, we'll be all right, you know. I suppose we're too young to realise how serious the situation we were in.
The story of the Irishmen's captivity became the focus of a media circus. The Irish soldiers were put on display for the world's press. Newspapers back in Ireland relayed mixed reports daily. Rumours circulated that the failed ceasefire had actually been a surrender. After weeks in captivity, hopes for release were high, but those hopes were soon dashed.
We were in a big army camp called Camp Massart, and I think about 4 o'clock that evening, we discovered that we weren't being exchanged.
There was no sign of a handover, which we were expecting. And the morale was certainly going downhill at this stage.
The first handover bid had failed. Behind the scenes, negotiations continued to secure the Irishmen's freedom. After almost 60 days held captive, the Irish soldiers were moved. Rumours of a prisoner exchange circulated. They had survived the siege at Jadotville. They had defended their trenches, suffered injuries, and come under attack from land and air. They had not lost a single life, but hundreds of Katangese had died in the conflict. On the 26th of October 1961, the Irish soldiers were freed.
At last we were out, you know, and we could walk away without anyone pointing a gun at us and saying, go back there, or waving me back, you know. It was a bit unreal in that respect, that we just could walk anywhere we wanted to, and we could talk to the lads who were there and shake hands.
The Irish soldiers returning to UN headquarters faced a mixed reception.
There were snide remarks being passed, that you throw in the towel, you show the white feather, that you're not fit to be wearing the uniform and all this thing. And there was many a bloody nose and a lot worse dealt out. And even up to the highest ranks now, people were saying that you should have held out to the last man.
Because it was just dawned us at this stage, like, you know, God, we wound up in a terrible mess there that we should never have been in. And it was a very, very sore point.
It was Christmas 1961 when the Irishmen returned home.
I got back to Mullingar on the 23rd of December. It was great to be home. I went downtown for a walk. There was times there you'd feel like jumping into the head where you hear a car coming or something. That reaction was still there.
It was the morning of Christmas Day, and it was snowing like Billy up. And there was about 6 inches of snow on the ground. We came in, and myself and my grandfather, we sat down and we drank a bottle of whiskey. Then we went to Mass on Christmas morning. And a small town, like, everybody knows everybody else, and everybody approach you, and what was it like, what were you doing, did you kill many people? And the same questions were asked, must have been 10,000 times. Now, 48 hours previous to this, I had all my buddies around me. I had a weapon which was very important to me. You always had somebody to talk to, and all of a sudden, nobody. That took an awful lot of getting used to.
The traumatic events at Jadotville deeply affected the Irishmen who lived through it.
Afterwards, you do think about it. And you do think about the target you fired at and saw them fall and heard them shout and cry. You do think about it. And I did think about it for a long time after coming home. And unfortunately, a lot of other chaps thought about it too. I know they did. And it got the better of some of them.
For many years, questions about events around the siege at Jadotville and the ceasefire cast a shadow over the Irish soldiers of A Company.
You had this terrible sniping that went on continuously. While he was in Jadotville, he held up the white flag. You know, that sort of thing. I've never heard anybody that served overseas say that. It was all people that never served overseas.
I felt everyone in A Company did their job well. I felt I did my job as best I could. And that's all you can do. Everyone made a name for themselves there, and it was a good name. You know, it was something to be proud of.
You have to be standing in the trench, and you have to be taking the incoming round, and you have to see the conditions of people under stress, young lads of 17 and younger, and they're standing there like men. That is the real test.
Despite events at Jadotville, Sean Foley returned to the Congo.
The one thing I was glad of, that I did get the chance to go back out with the 38th Battalion, and straight away we were in action again. It was then I had addressed the situation for myself at Jadotville.
The Irish Army, everywhere they went, would have been peacekeeping missions, and they came out with all flags flying. That ain't proud.
45 years later, the crisis in the Congo continues. For the Irish soldiers at Jadotville, remembrance was finally marked with honorary scrolls and a memorial plaque at Costume Barracks Athlone. At last, the Irishmen of A Company received the recognition they had sought for so long.
When you look down along the normal roll in alphabetical order, as the names are being called out, to accept this scroll, the gaps are there.
A lot of people have died out of that unit. They died. I suppose maybe putting it with broken hearts might be a little bit much. But I know they felt very bitter about it. They never saw the plaque in Athlone. Never will. I was there, and I'm about 5'9½", I think. But I was about 6'6" walking out the gate that evening. Just was there, it was recognised. And that meant so much. And I think to everybody that was there that evening, I think it meant so much to those that there was some bit of recognition 40 odd years later. Fine, better late than never.
Some cars are built purely for driving pleasure, some for comfort. Some cars are built for strength, others for safety. But now you can find everything in one car. New Renault Laguna. You can never be too demanding.